Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Explain series. You're the host, Dr Bret Palmer. And in this episode we're going to be talking about syphilis epidemiology and why it's a pandemic out of control. So I'm going to use in today's Explain series data mainly from England, and the reason why that is because there's an organisation called Public Health England that keeps rather good records of the amount of syphilis cases in this region. But what we talk about now is generally quite generalisable to other societies, other regions and other countries around the world. Syphilis in England over the last 10 years has gone up by around about 150%. That's quite a big increase. And 2018 there was around about 7,500 cases, and this is the largest number of reported syphilis cases since 1949. So what's happening? Why is there sudden big increases, and why are these increases all over the world? And as you can see from the graph behind me, in terms of the number of syphilis cases, those numbers are going up and up and up, but mainly in men, not in women. Well, it's all to do with the type of sexual risk you have and the number of partners you have. And as you can see on this graph, it seems to be mainly concentrated in men who have sex with men and not so much in the heterosexual community. And in women who have sex with women, it's practically non-existent. It's all to do with really how syphilis is passed around. Some of these things will be in later episodes, and especially the diagnosis and treatment will be in later episodes. So today we're just going to be looking at the epidemiology. If we look at, in terms of the age spread of syphilis, we see that in females, which is the bottom line, there's a very small spread between the ages of 18 to up to 35. After that it seems to peter out. But in men it goes from effectively 17, 18 all the way through to late 50s, early 60s. Why is that? Well, in men who have sex with men, there tends to be a wider acceptance of intergenerational sex. So it's quite common for people in their 20s, for example, to have older partners, whereas in the heterosexual community it's still common that men and women will generally, as a general rule, will have sex with people of a similar age as them. What's actually happened in England? Are all the cases evenly spread? Well, if we look at this slide, most of the cases seem to be centred around London. So does that mean never come to London on your holidays? Well, every metropolitan area is affected like this. So this could be a picture of France, and the biggest or the highest rate will be in Paris, and if it was America, the highest rate would be in New York or San Francisco or Washington DC. If it was Canada, it would probably be Toronto or Montreal. And so every country around the world will have this type of pattern, and it's heavily affecting metropolitan areas. And it is, and so if you, so every country has a large city population, and in cities sex is more easily gained. And over the last 10-15 years or so, most countries have seen increases of anywhere between 70 and 80%, all the way through to, in Japan and China, where syphilis has more historically been endemic, up to 400%. And so it is very, very common, and this is not just an England thing, this is a worldwide thing. And so it's effectively a pandemic because it's affecting every region of the world, and not much is being done to try and stop it. So why is syphilis spreading? Why is it not dying out? So if I did this lecture in the 60s or 70s, I would have said in England syphilis is extinct, it's a dead illness. And that's because in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, sexual behaviours were very, very much different. It was very frowned upon to have many partners, and the total number of contacts you had would be generally very low, and so they could be traced. And so it's much easier to control syphilis. Now, in this particular graph, which is actually data from Scotland in 2015, from Health Protection Scotland, the top line is the number of cases. So if you only had 1 contact per case, for example, then chances are the health services could quite easily trace those individual contacts. Probably because if you've only got one contact, you know who they are, you know their telephone number, you know where they live. And so around about 72% of individuals are easily traced. Now, with modern attitudes changing and people having sex more freely, then people who are having 10, 20 or more than 20 partners may not know their names, may not know their telephone numbers, may not know where they live. And so the proportion of contacts traced then falls down to under 10%. So it's very hard to trace those individuals. In general, if you have a partnership with an individual, then the chances of passing syphilis on, if you have syphilis, is between 10 and 60%. It depends on how long the partnership is, and it also depends on how often you have sex. But the actual per sexual act, the chances of transferring syphilis is actually relatively quite low. But it also depends on what stage of syphilis you are, and we'll come on to stages of syphilis at a later episode. So the R0 of syphilis, that's the reproductive number, that's how many cases of syphilis can be generated by one individual, is usually under 3. What does this mean? Well, an R0 of below 1 means the number of cases will actually shrink and it will peter out. If it is above 1, the number of cases will expand, and so the epidemic or the spread of the disease will continue. And every disease has its R0 value. And I did something about the coronavirus and R0 a few months ago as well. And obviously that number depends very much on the number of cases you have. If you're having 20 contacts and you have syphilis, the R0 may be much higher than that. So, what are the main drivers of syphilis in not just England but around the world? Well, changing sexual attitudes and behaviour. It's more acceptable to have fun and enjoy yourself and let your hair down. Also the change in travel behaviour, both nationally and internationally. Travel tended, before coronavirus anyway, to be relatively cheap, and also before coronavirus as well, there was an increased disposable income. And all these factors are fueled by geosocial networking applications, in other words, social media, and we'll come on to some examples later. Another problem is that sexual health systems have not really changed with the cultural and technological development, and this has facilitated an unchecked increase in many sexually transmitted diseases, but especially syphilis. So syphilis is very easy to control in a closed society where you're not allowed to have sex and it's all heavily frowned upon. But obviously people are generally quite unhappy and feel quite oppressed. But in more liberal and relaxed societies, you need to have a very good surveillance system and a very good system of tracking sexual partners. And unfortunately in the West, most sexual health systems are not very good at tracking syphilis down. And the pity, because they need to do this, otherwise syphilis will become endemic, in other words, just part of everyday life, if they don't shift it, and it can be a pretty nasty disease, as we'll find out in later episodes. So examples of geosocial networking apps, well, you've heard them all. Tinder, Grindr, Scruff, Romeo, Growl, and some you probably haven't heard of, like Trans, Bumble, Owltime, I haven't heard of them, Badoo, don't know what that is, but apparently these are all different types of dating apps where you can find an individual and spend some time with them. So, in conclusion, if you're a doctor or a medical student, you will encounter syphilis if you haven't already done so, and that will either be professionally or personally. If you're a member of the public and you're young, free, single, and having lots of sex, remember condoms, but also remember to get regularly checked out. And syphilis can present as anything and everything. And so for you doctors and medical students out there, always keep it on the differential, because anything can be syphilis, literally anything. And if you are testing for syphilis, you should always test for HIV. Now, this paper was done in 1952, and it's a very good paper, and it shows you why you should wear gloves. And so if you're in a country where you don't wear many gloves when you're examining people's ulcers or sores, in this particular survey of physicians, over half actually had extragenital syphilis because they weren't wearing gloves. Okay, so remember to test regularly and at the start of every new relationship. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. Here's some of the websites I've used to put this episode together, and thank you very much for watching. Have good sexual health, and please like, subscribe and share, and see you at the next episode. Take care.